Hello and welcome to Janine's Sewing Room. Today I would like to talk about buttons and how I was taught how to sew on a button. Now there's different kind of buttons. The most common is your 4-hole buttons, your 2-hole buttons, and your decorative buttons. Today I'm going to demonstrate how I sew on the buttons by hand, and I can show you how to sew on the 2 and the 4-hole buttons by machine. To start sewing on your button, you're going to need a few supplies. You're going to need your garment, a button, some thread, a needle, a marking tool. You can either use a water-soluble marker, chalk marker, or if you don't have any of these, you could use a pencil. And a cutting tool. I need to mark where I want my button to go. Now it's time to thread the needle. I take my thread, get the edge of it wet. Sometimes you need to take off the last little bit of it because it could be frayed. And then holding it between my fingers, just slide it through. That one was pretty tricky. Then I measure about 12 inches. Then I take the end of the thread and with a little bit of a damp finger, I loop the thread around my index finger and then I roll the end off with my thumb. And it makes a big, funky knot. But at least this won't go through the material. I'll trim just a little bit of it off, but I don't want to cut the knot off. And now I'm ready to sew on my button. I've now marked where I want my button to go. And so to start, I'm going to take the needle and the thread and I'm going to go through the garment from one side to the other because my button inevitably is going to be like this. And that knot will prevent the thread from going through the material. Then what I do is I take my button and I use my needle to go up and then over, and I can see that same spot where the knot was. I'm going to line it up and I'm going to go into that spot. Now most professionals, when they're sewing on a button, they want to leave a little bit of space so that the button isn't too tight against the garment. So in this case, I take another needle and I just hold it like that, just so that that thread isn't too taut. And I want to try to match up the same spots on the back. I'm going to do this about 5 or 6 times back and forth. And then on the last round, I'm going to come up, but I'm not going to go through the button. Now this is why you have this little spacer here. I'm going to pull it out, and then I'm going to go around the button 3 or 4 times, and then I can go back out and that makes a little bit of a shank for the button to stick up away from the garment, so that when you're taking the button and you're putting it through the buttonhole, it's not too tight. And then on the back side, I go through a couple of the threads. I'll make sure that my tail is sticking out. And I'm going to go through this loop, and it makes a knot. I'll show you again. Go through. And then put your needle through the knot, or the hole of the thread, to make the knot. And then what I do is I cut it off, and I leave just a little bit of a tail, because you don't want to cut that knot off. And there you go. You've sewn on your button. Sewing on a decorative button is similar to sewing on the 2-hole button, except that I can't use a spacer. I'm going to do the same thing with threading my needle. I'm going to cut the edge of this frayed thread off. Use a little bit of water for the end. And then I'm going to make a knot. Once again, I take the thread, I go around my index finger, and then I use my thumb to roll it off, making a knot. Now the same way I started the other button, I'm going to go in and through my garment. And this little knot should hold. And then I'm going to take the button, and this is the side that's going to be against the garment, and I'm going to go through. And then holding it with my thumb and index finger, I'm going to go in the same spot that that first knot went through. And on the back side, I'm just going to follow that same spot. And then when I get to the front, I'm going to take it and go through the button. And as I do this a couple times, the button will get a little bit taut against the fabric. I just don't want to pull it too much that it bunches on the other side. Now once again, I'm going to do this 5 or 6 times. And then the last time I'm going to go through, but I'm not going to go through the button. And I'm going to wrap it around. The button. Probably 4 or 5 times. And then I'm going to go through to the back side. And then this is where I'm going to knot off my thread. So I take it, I go through a couple of these threads that I've already made. And then when I get a small loop, I'm going to take the needle through the loop to make a knot. And I'm going to do this 2 times so that my button doesn't come off. Sewing a 4-hole button is similar to sewing on a 2-hole button. You're just going to do it twice. You're going to sew across the top 2 holes, and then you're going to sew across the bottom 2 holes, and then you're going to secure it with a knot in the back. With a sewing machine, you can also use your zigzag stitch to sew on a button. With a sewing machine, you start by dropping the feed dogs down. And then you use your zigzag stitch in the top 2 holes. Adjust your width. So you're going to sew a few times to secure the top 2. And then you're going to move it to the bottom 2. And then I like to secure it in one hole. So take the zigzag stitch off and put the width to 0 and just go in the same hole a few times. And there you have it. Now, in order to make the loops a little bit loose in your machine, you can take a pin, and when you're going back and forth with the zigzag stitches, you can put the pin in between. This button is a little bit higher, so I didn't do it for this one. Otherwise, it would be way too loose. And there you have it. Thank you for watching my YouTube video.